We're live.
Perfect. Chet, would you be able to give me access to share screen, please?
There you go. It should be on now.
Thank you. Okay, can everyone see the agenda all right? Okay. Okay, so just give everyone up to date. Right now, the next section that we'll be going over is planning factors, the long-range transportation plan, transportation improvement program, and performance measures. This discussion will include an overall planning process and the required elements of the transportation planning and program development process through these documents. To kind of give a quick background on each item. So planning factors is basically the kind of the bones of what develops and creates the long-range transportation plan, as well as the TIP. There's various different factors that make up planning and are required by federal regulation. The TIP itself is just a set of programmed projects that the MPO submits every 4 years. And then we'll be also going over performance measures too. So that includes performance-based planning programming as well. So to start, I'll go ahead and start with questions in regards to planning factors. And when you're developing, just throughout the whole entire planning process, how are each of the planning factors considered in the planning process? Are there any planning factors that are more relevant than the other in the Central Virginia region?
It's a great question. Thank you, Richard. This is Chet. I am the planning factors. We approach all of our work with the understanding of Code of Federal Regulations and the drivers for what our focus should be. So the planning factors are all part of the consideration when we first think about developing a project like the long range plan. And I can speak directly to this long range plan, Connect RVA 2045. We considered the planning factors at a number of different levels when we're looking at our vision, goals, and objectives, when we're looking at our public engagement process and kind of the education component of that with the community and folks who may not live and breathe this as much as we do. We also, this time, especially considered the planning factors when we tried to think about performance measures and how to rank and prioritize project impacts. We looked at the different planning factors, for example, travel and tourism, and had serious discussions about whether we were able to capture or collect data around that factor that could help to advance or to put a hold on a particular project. So those were all discussions that went into multiple phases of, say, our long-range plan development. But I think in general, those planning factors drive how we develop, the long-range plan, the TIP, other types of products that we're engaged with and we're responsible for.
Thank you, Chet. Does the federal team have any follow-up questions in regards to planning factors before we move on to the LRTP?
I guess you had another question there that I didn't answer. Are there any that stand out or that are more seem to be more important to our Central Virginia region? As we did, I'm speaking of recent experience, as we did the public engagement for development of our vision, goals, and objectives. These components of planning work were raised with people who took surveys online, and we were able to get an understanding of where the priorities should be in terms of some of these. So safety was number one in terms of what people thought was important to consider for this long range plan update. Accessibility and equity were important. Preservation of the existing system. So kind of following along with some of the federal direction that's been happening the past few months. Maintenance of what's there is the primary goal rather than developing new capacity. Now, obviously, new capacity is still a priority for many of our elected officials and jurisdictions, but the understanding that there are maintenance needs. So I think some of those factors rose to the top as we've developed a long range plan.
Thank you, Chet. And speaking of the long-range transportation plan, can you go ahead and share the status of the current Connect RVA 2045 update? And are there any challenges or opportunities that the Richmond MPO is currently encountering with that development?
Well, yes. So the Connect RVA 2045 is in its final public review period. We started a 30-day public review of the draft plan. That started August 16th and runs through September 15th. We have a multi-pronged approach for this 30-day review that tries to combine all the different types of opportunities that we provided in the past for these other phases, as well as understanding limitations that people may have in terms of being in public and not being able to follow the more traditional engagement routes. But the plan is up for adoption. It is scheduled to be on the agenda for our October 4th policy board meeting. We understand that later that week, I believe it's October 7th, would be the lapse date for the current plan. So we have that in mind as we've tried to schedule out our policy board meetings. We don't want to have to deal with that. So I think that the challenges mentioned a little bit earlier, but obviously COVID has presented a great challenge for public engagement. But I think we've hit it head on, and I do think that the engagement that we've had, although mostly virtual, has been way more robust for this plan cycle than any one we've had in the past, which is I'm really proud of in terms of how our team has been able to kind of pivot starting in March of 2020 and change our engagement plan to really focus to virtual engagement and think about all the different ways that people can be part of the process. It's been hugely successful, and I think that we'll definitely be carrying over a lot of these methods into future engagement opportunities, no matter what the on the ground conditions are. I'll call that an opportunity as well. I think that being able to engage different populations than would normally be part of a process like this is a big opportunity, and that's one of the things that we've tried to think about as we've updated our Title VI plan and thought more holistically about public engagement and education. Is how do we make it easier for all segments of the population to be part of the process, whether they know anything about transportation or planning or regional issues or not. So we keep that front and center as we start to think more about next steps.
Thank you, Chet. Did the federal team have any follow-up questions from that? Okay.
No, Richard, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. So I'll move forward with the next question. So kind of going back towards coordination between Richmond and Tri-Cities. Could you describe how the Richmond MPO and Tri-Cities MPO goals, objectives, targets, strategies, and investments in the LRTP are consistent with those with the other MPO? So I guess how do each MPO's LRTPs kind of overlap or share similarities?
Yeah, I can speak from our perspective. And I think we're all part of the, I guess, the burden and the benefit of COVID is that with virtual meetings, we all know what's going on with each other. So we've been able to participate, whether active or passively, in the work that Tri-Cities is doing. Our timelines somewhat overlap, so we've been able to share behind the scenes at the staff level successes and failures in terms of engagement and tools we've used and those kinds of things. I don't think, I mean, we don't have like a programmatic step in our schedule to coordinate with each other, but it happens just because of, I'd say Ron and I are kind of overlap in terms of our participation in each other's activities, and I've encouraged my staff to do the same thing. They tune into Tri-Cities TAC meetings, and we know what's going on. We mentioned earlier that the overlap with Chesterfield County, and I think that coordination with Chesterfield Planning and Transportation has been helpful in that regard too, to just get their perspective on what's happening in both MPAs.
Hey, Richard, I want to kind of jump in here too. You'll learn this more tomorrow, but we're probably about 6 months to, or actually 9 months to a year behind them officially on our expiration. So we've been particularly following along what they're doing. We have a gap consultant that OIP has let us use as part of our long range plan and our planning and programming development process. So we've definitely been looking to theirs for Richmond Regional. They, like you said, I'm on their long range planning committee. They're on our long range planning committee. So there's a lot of back and forth. For the actual, have we set up the exact same metrics and that kind of stuff? We're not officially at that point yet. We will be later in the year. But we certainly have been in a lot of communication at the staff level as to how we're going to do that. And in fact, our gap consultant is going to be presenting just the whole performance-based planning process to our TAC/2045 committee on September 6th, really kicking that off. And like I said, I'm particularly looking for what Richmond Regional has done and some other MPOs. So I would have to say that right now we're not all married together yet on how we're going to be coordinating with each other. But I think because of the measures that we're looking at, the data we're trying to look at, the goals that are very similar for both MPOs, we're going to probably be steering in the same direction, even if it's not exactly the same.
Perfect. Thank you, Ron.
And I guess one last thing, we do have the combined model. So the travel demand model is going to be a unifying factor, and we'll obviously we'll work with Ron as much as we can as they get into that phase of their development process. Yeah.
But that's one of the things that we still need to figure out is how we're going to then evaluate solutions on those areas that have been identified in the model as having needs. And that's going to take a lot of coordination between us and Richmond Regional.
Hey, Chet and Ron, Ivan. Hey, listen, beyond staff interactions and coordination, in terms of the elected officials on both boards, do the elected officials of both boards coordinate, especially during special events, the state of the region type thing, where elected officials all meet together And there's several presentations given about transportation resources and benefits, and
Right.
how the boards are addressing the concerns of the Richmond urbanized area.
Well, first of all, we have a membership overlap with both MPOs because Mr. Carroll is the county representative on both MPOs. I know that, and Chet can speak more of this, you try to have those fall transportation summits that I know you're working on again, that there's a lot of invitations going out to the elected officials, I think from both MPOs, don't they, Chet?
Yes, that's typically the case.
Yeah. So we do have that. I mean, there's processes that wind up having to be at the same time too, like the M-TIPs have to be at the same time. There are different times when we need to coordinate with each other when it comes to like the earmarks that have just been going through, freight planning and freight network determinations. Both boards are aware of what's going on, but I don't know if they're actually talking to each other directly with that.
Yeah, I mean, this is Chad. Ivan, I'll be honest, there's a lot of discussions that elected officials have, and I'm just not aware of it. So
I understand.
I can't speak to it.
I can see that. I can see that happening behind the scenes. Certainly, I appreciate that, Chad. How about on transfer related? Do PAT and GRTC? I mean, is there discussion amongst between the two regional transit agencies?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Okay.
Because there's agreements between GRTC and PAT for dividing funds. I think, Chet, you all actually oversee the, I'll call it, I keep remembering the initials, but basically the human resources vehicles process, which involves both agencies. There's an express bus from Petersburg to Richmond that's been going on for a number of years. So I know that they do talk to each other, and I'm talking with the folks at PAT as they've been talking with GRTC about different things.
Okay, that's good, Ron, because one of the questions I had earlier was with respect to the Richmond's vision plan, is there coordination between the GRTC and PAT with respect to not just a vision plan for the Richmond region, but a coordinated vision plan that encompasses Richmond as well as Tri-Cities. So it sounds like GRTC and PAT are coordinating on that larger vision, or have been coordinating on that larger vision.
Yeah, but not to a major degree, I think is what I'm saying too, because as Chet was talking about earlier, there was a vision plan that was focused to CVTA, which
Right.
only part of our MPO is in the CVTA area, Southern Chesterfield County. When it comes to assistance, I mean, PAT gets a lot of their planning assistance through DRPT, and I think they can jump in any part of that conversation. And there's been the TDP and the TSP and various discussions on how to the human resources planning is a joint effort with both MPOs. Those type of things, keep going on. A lot of it's led by DRPT, and we're both participating. It kind of gets into what Chet was talking about earlier about what both MPOs do. There's a number of statewide efforts that we're both coordinating with each other, like resilience and some, which is a factor in our long range plans, to try to and there's a lot of communication back and forth at a staff level on these different topics.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Sorry about that, I was muted. And to read out Martha's comment that she had, she mentioned that there's membership overlap in Chesterfield, if that wasn't already said out loud.
Yes, that's right. And there's a PDC overlap too. So there's also at the PDC level, different things going on with the membership of Chesterfield County being on both PDCs.
I'm sorry, Ron, you said there's coordinated effort between the PDCs?
Well, the members that are on the MPO boards usually are also members of the PDC. That's the way I think both, I don't know if it's Richmond Regional does it, but I know Tri-Cities tries to do that with Crater PDC. And in Chesterfield County, then usually their representative has been on both the PDC board and the MPO board for Crater and Tri-Cities, and then also be a member of the MPO board or TPO board up in Richmond. And in the case of Mr. Carroll, he also serves as a representative on the CVTA board, which he's really got a lot going on right now.
Yeah, that's correct. Ivan and Richard, this is Martha. Currently, all members of the Chesterfield County Board of Supervisors sit on the Board of Commissioners for Plan RVA. And then, of course, because of the membership structure of the TPO, it's a smaller subset of that group that's on the TPO. But between, as Ron said, the membership on the Tri-Cities MPO, the Crater Planning District Commission, the Richmond Planning District Commission, Plan RVA, the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization, and CVTA, there's actually quite a bit of overlap of those folks. And I know that those elected officials have, particularly during the pandemic, worked really hard to continue to build the relationships across jurisdictions. So the leadership of Richmond City, Chesterfield County, Henrico and Richmond meet monthly through a mayors and chairs convening. So like Chet said, there are oftentimes instances where representatives of the local jurisdictions themselves get together where our staff are not involved. And then I know that similar convenings happen in the Tri-Cities area with Chesterfield and the leadership of the communities there. So they do quite a bit of coordination at the elected to elected level in the surrounding localities.
Yeah, Martha, I appreciate that. I thought they were meeting, but they just weren't. It was kind of sort of behind the scenes, things that we're not,
right, like the mayors and mayors meeting. It's not a public meeting.
Right.
You're not advertised. But yeah, and I would also add, I mean, there are other regional entities where these folks are, coordinating not just on transportation issues, but around economic development, which I know was mentioned before, and certainly tourism. So there's lots of different spaces and places where combinations of our localities are together discussing regional issues.
Okay.
And one more thing to add, I've been aware of, particularly the past few months, I know Martha's aware of this, is there's been a lot of discussion amongst the elected officials at the county or city level with our House of Delegates and senators when it comes to what we're going to have in the state budget,
Right.
or what they're going to lobby for at the federal level. There's been a lot of meetings. We don't see them. We just hear about them in the background, but we know there's those conversations going on, maybe related to a specific topic, or maybe just related to, what type of things are we looking for having to have the federal government help us out with.
Absolutely, Ron. Thank you. Thank you, Martha.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I guess following up with that question, how does Richmond MPO make efforts to include members of the public and interested parties from the neighboring jurisdictions in the public input process?
We're focusing hard on this, especially with the development of this new long range plan. I think that it's not an easy solution. In the past, we've been content to, put something in the paper and check the boxes to say that there has been public engagement, but we have a realization that that's not the best solution for everybody, and we want to do as much as we can to really focus on those communities that are not engaged at all and probably don't even know that there's opportunities to have this conversation. So I think the solution is obviously a multi-pronged one, and it's something that we have to be where people are, which is not always the easiest thing for us as staff to get around, and elected officials, obviously. So we base our approach. I talked a little bit earlier today about public engagement plan for each product we do. We put together an engagement plan, which kind of outlines the process and the different tools that we'd like to incorporate, whether that's an in-person meeting or an online, a virtual one-on-one session, or comment forums, social media, you name it, speaking with stakeholder groups directly. All those things are on the table, and we try and tailor the approach for each product based on the input, the type of input we need, the type of feedback we need, the staff capacity, and the audience that we're talking to. So it's really it's a whole separate. We could have an entire wing of staff focused just on engagement and inclusion of the public, and we still wouldn't cover all the bases. So it's something that we're trying to get a better understanding of and establish at least a baseline and build our approach from there.
Chet, that was great information. Thank you for offering that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chet. Next question is, if and how does the project selection procedures used by Richmond MPO and Tri-Cities MPO, are there any overlap, or are there any coordination? I guess, yeah, is there any overlap in the project selection procedures?
I mean, I'll be quick. At this point, there is no overlap in terms of project selection. I mean, we're as transparent as we can be, and we're certainly looking forward to working with Ron and his shop on how they develop their process, and we'll share as much as we can in terms of what we've developed. But the overlap in terms of our schedules hasn't allowed for joint consideration of project selection.
About the only thing that we've had that I think that overlapped with Richmond when it comes to being the same was the CMAQ selection scoring systems were the same at one point, but they're already diverging. Just to let you know, in November of 2019, we had a workshop on how to prioritize RSTP and CMAQ projects. And Chet Parsons and his folks from Richmond Region were involved. We had folks from DOT involved in that. And we tried to come up with, what kind of ways can we develop an RSTP and CMAQ project selection process, methods, procedures that will work for our MPOs. From that, I'm not stealing too much of Chet's thunder, but that you all felt you needed to really take a good change in your process that you had before, which was similar to Hampton Roads' process. And they've taken some great steps to do that in this long-range plan, which then will lead into the other stuff. But for us, we're still early, like I said, but we're also still trying to look at the experience that these other MPOs are having. And at this point, like I said, the only thing we overlapped at all, I think, was a CMAQ scoring process for like one round for each of us, and that was it.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Chet. Moving forward, I was curious, with this, in regards to the CMP, how does the CMP lead to the development of programs and projects contained in the LRTP and TIP?
I'm extremely proud of the work that's been done on our CMP. We talked a little about it earlier, touched on the ability to process data and understand impacts. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's kind of rolled over into development of projects in the LRTP and TIP is the ability to analyze conditions and use the CMP and the tools it provides to understand kind of the baseline, the current day conditions that we need to start from when we think about issues, needs, recommendations, future projects. And that's something that leads into the early phases of a long range plan process, for example. Knowing what's out there now, and it helps to kind of frame the discussion when we're having it with the public. Say, oh, look, you got bottlenecks on 288. Do you experience those in your daily commute? If so, where are the problems? Does this provide another way to think about what the needs are going to be? And this is one of those instances where we've taken our CMP and put it in a story map. So you can easily see from the tools that are there, kind of where we are on the ground and what the conditions are.
Thank you, Chet. And then to follow up on that, how does Richmond MPO and also if it, or I guess, let's see how I can word this. So yeah, how's Richmond MPO with like the neighboring Tri-Cities, as well as DRPT, GRTC, and the other state DOT, and the state DOT share data to enable a comprehensive metropolitan-wide evaluation?
Well, I'm not sure if this is exactly where the question was headed, but I mean, in the past 2 years, the way to share data has been put it on the internet, and we're doing that as much as we can, cooperatively and otherwise. I mean, Ron's keenly aware of everything that we've shared. We want to be transparent in the data that we provide, and it's better for everybody if everything is just out there front and center. So we probably inundate our committees and work groups and task forces with emails that share links to our data and process development. We share social media posts that point towards specific locations and the data that's available and what it means, and just kind of do that as much as possible. I'm looking forward to the time when we can, when I can stand in front of a Kiwanis club and point to a screen and talk to them face to face about things. But we'll get to that point when we reach it.
Thank you, Chet. Yeah, that actually definitely answered my question I had. And I'm going to transition into the tip now. How does the state, Richmond MPO, and transit operators collaborate on the development of the tip? Is there coordination between the Richmond and Tri-Cities in the tip development process?
Yes, I think there is some coordination. I did want to ask Miles Bushing, who leads our tip process and development efforts. We just did a full update recently, and I'm sure Miles has some insights that he might want to provide in this line of questions.
And Richard, I'm surprised VDOT hasn't jumped in, because they try to update the tip at the same time for everybody in Virginia. And for our urbanized area, all the projects are listed for both MPOs, and then we both take a look at that and share with each other if there's anything that needs to be in each other's MPO, that type of thing, as we're moving forward with the tips. So, and there's also an agreement that VAMPO has with VDOT in developing the tips, so that we're able to try to work together in the same direction in developing the tip for each of us, and the state for their own state tip.
And this is Miles. So kind of to echo some of the stuff that Ron's already said in terms of the coordination. At the beginning of the process, we review the project lists essentially together and coordinate within the two MPOs to make sure we have the right projects for each tip. The tip development of the actual document is largely independent after that. So each MPO is independently coordinating their reviews with the localities. But then when it comes back for approval, the public comment period and conformity are coordinated. So there's generally a public review at the exact same time for the entire region. And then adoption is usually within a few weeks of each other. So it's since the statewide process lines up so well, we were able to coordinate quite a bit through the development of the tip.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Thanks, Miles.
Thank you, Miles. That was a good explanation.
So, hey, Chet, so with respect to, I guess, the revenue assumptions, are they, I guess also for CVTA, are they validated by VDOT or CVTA validating their revenue assumptions separately?
Specific to CVTA?
Right.
Yeah, CVTA has a fiscal agent agreement with Chesterfield County.
Okay.
So basically working through a third party to look at, look at the revenue projections, the actual numbers of what's been collected and project that out. So working with the state tax department as well.
Okay.
That's really where we get a yearly projection, and that's updated maybe every 6 months.
Okay.
In terms of what the expectations are in terms of the tax numbers. And that kind of starts the conversation. And then we can go back and fact check previous months to see if it lines up with what the projections were. So it's mostly working with kind of the financial folks at VDOT to start with, and making sure that the reporting process is really understood.
Gotcha. Are those I guess our CVTA projects, are they programmed under a separate document, or are they all part of the Transportation Improvement Program document?
We haven't done any yet. So
okay.
We're still developing the regional priorities. So
Gotcha. Okay.
I think when we get to that point, that's a good question to answer. And I think it's going to depend on whether it's CVTA leveraged or if it's fully CVTA funded, and who's managing. Do we depend on VDOT to manage the project? Those kinds of things.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is it depends.
Gotcha.
I don't know. That's part of what we're going to figure out.
That's a great answer. That's the best answer. Appreciate it.
And one last question. But after this, I believe FTA has some questions regarding to the TIP. But my question kind of links between the TIP and the LRTP. How successfully do you believe the TIP reflects policies, investment choices, and priorities identified in the long-range transportation plan?
I'm going to look to Miles to take this one.
Sure. So I think there's several pieces to this. So everything that's in the TIP in generally has already been programmed through the 6-year improvement program for the state. And for most programs, both statewide and then obviously the ones that are administered by the MPO, LRTP consistency is the first thing before projects even submitted. So it's a pre-screening criteria element. Like for the Smart Scale program, there has to be a resolution of endorsement from the MPO. So most of the projects that are coming in have already been pre-screened for consistency with the LRTP. But once we get a request for an amendment, we also review it against the LRTP goals. So for every single project that's in the TIP, there's actually a section that has each of the goals that we have in the current LRTP and assesses yes or no, whether the project is helping to meet that goal and advance that planning goal. So I think in general, we can say that every project is advancing it. And in terms of the overall policies, I think the spending, one thing I was looking at was the maintenance and operations, which Chet hit on earlier as being a priority. And I'm just looking at the project groupings, we have almost $800 million in operations and maintenance type projects. So I think it's definitely following the trend of what we expected from the LRTP.
Great, thank you, Miles. Those are all the questions I had. Do any of the federal team members have any questions?
Hey, not at this time, Richard. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ivan.
Richard, are we also going to discuss performance measures?
I'm sorry. Yes, there'll be performance measures. I just saw in my notes. I saw a couple questions from our transit related to the tip. I was wondering, wasn't sure if you wanted to ask those or you wanted to wait.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought my questions were I believe were related to performance measures, so I'll hold.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can actually go ahead and transition into the performance measures with those questions if you like.
Sure. Okay. So looking at, I guess he's picking the tip, and there is obviously a very robust section on performance targets, meeting the federal performance measures for both highway and transit. I think that is definitely, that's definitely a good basis, I think. And I know that sounds like you are not only using the goals to kind of help prioritize projects, and I believe you're also using performance measures as well. I guess I really had questions regarding the targets. I noticed the targets for transit state of good repair. Let's see, I'm sorry, caught me off guard for a second here. Let me get my bearings. Oh yeah, values. Oh yeah, as it was for highway, it looks like the highway targets had kind of a very good description of the every year you're updating your targets. I guess with VDOT, likewise with transit, assuming you're updating them with GRTC and DRPT. I did notice that you had the 2020 targets in there for transit, but I didn't see the like an actual, it's good to have the target, but I didn't know what the actual, a target was. So I don't sure if there was a way to compare kind of what was actually happening versus what were the actual target versus the target value. Highway, just like you had that for highway, you didn't have for transit. So I just wonder if there was an issue with getting the data to show the actual targets for transit repair, or.
Hi, this is Miles again. Is this for the TAM and safety performance measure in the tip?
This is for TAM, yeah, sorry. So yeah, so I understand like for safety, probably only have 1 year or so of data, because that was, that's relatively new, but for the TAM, so I just wanted to see if you were reporting not only the, your actual, then plus the target, for.
Sure. So the table in there is actually for tier 2 agencies. So GRTCs is just included as a link to their existing planning document. Since they develop it separately, it's easier for us to just link directly to their plan. So that's what we have included in there. And the formatting from that, I believe, was something that DRPT developed for statewide use for that section of performance-based planning.
Yes. Okay. So you do have. Okay. So you're referencing GRTCs. They're tier 1. So okay, the table only showed tier 2, but I guess you're saying you're referencing tier 1 targets, but you're not putting them in the tip.
Exactly. And I'll let Tiffany, it looks like she wants to jump in on this one.
Yes. So for us at DRPT, we provided a group plan for all of our tier 2 agencies. And then for the instruction for all of our MPOs in terms of updating their tip, we provided a kind of a boilerplate template and language to include as an appendix to the tips. And so in the instances for any MPOs, mostly our TMAs that would have a tier 1, they were given the option of how they would want to reference their those performance measures or targets from their transit agencies. So here in Richmond, for example, they opted to just provide a link to GRTC's plan in this case.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, this is kind of like the way I kind of see the performance-based planning. This is like the first wave. You get targets are established, You work with your partners to get those targets. Then over time, you have to kind of start this narrative in the TIP that explains, how are you achieving these targets? By linking the priorities in the TIP. We're spending this much money in safety projects to achieve, these safety targets, or TAM, or so kind of like that to me is like the next level. It's not just trying to get to an understanding of maybe the next step would be to kind of maybe be a little bit more robust in demonstrating how you are you're achieving these targets in your TIP. The linkages, I guess I'm trying to get the linkages. That's why I had my question. How does the TIP link the investment priorities toward achieving the highway and transit performance targets? I mean, it's one thing just to dump them in the TIP, which is great. That was a requirement. But what's the next step is to then kind of demonstrate how the TIP is actually it's getting to those targets, and the investments that you're choosing are helping to get to a better state of good repair. And then like the next level is, and then to kind of tying it all together, you have this like a system report, saying how much money we're spending on safety, operations, expansion, so forth. It's really like a real kind of very robust picture you're painting for the public, so they have a better understanding of how it all works. I don't know if that's
Sure.
Is that something that is that something that it's still in progress, or is that?
So sure, I can jump in on that. So this is very new. This was just added to the TIP earlier this year, I believe. I'm correct on this section. But this is something that we obviously update as we update the TIP moving forward. Part of what we have in here is a brief discussion of funding and what sorts of programs that the MPO administers and sort of opportunities to support the TAM goals and the targets that we've set. But we don't have a breakdown of like annual performance in here yet. So that's something we can definitely add for future iterations of the TIP.
I think, I did see pieces of it. So I think it's actually it's like almost, I think on the highway target side, there was some, they were identifying, how much, money and how much funding in the TIP is going toward, like for highway safety, to achieve the targets for, highway safety targets. And I was like, that's great. I mean, that's exactly what, you're trying to paint this picture, this narrative of how you're linking the investments in the TIP to achieving the TAM targets. It's kind of the next step. So I think that's definitely, like moving in the right direction. Just, I guess maybe on the transit side, it would just maybe need to be a little bit more, tying that linkage to, how the TIP and the targets are being met. That's all. I think all the pieces are there. It's just kind of tying it together. I mean, looks like all the data, it's just this kind of, making note of it. That was all. Yeah, I think that's all I had.
Excuse me, this is Marcia.
Yeah.
I was thinking that I'd seen something, and I looked up on the internet and I saw a presentation that planrva.org has out there on the transportation performance measures, a progress report from 2018. There's a actual presentation on the internet, and it goes into that. I can put the link in the chat box or something. Maybe we can look at that and see if that's what you're looking for.
That'd be great. Thanks, Marcia. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Chat box.
Well, thank you. That's all I had. I just wanted to, on the transit performance measurements.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Marcia, for sharing that link. So it looks like we're coming up to the next section here. I only had a couple questions. If that's okay, Ryan, if I ask those questions before we jump into your section.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. So yeah, the last questions I had in performance measures is I was kind of curious. I know this morning when we were talking about the 2017 recommendations and corrective actions. I know you mentioned there was mention about performance measures and EJ analysis and how EJ analysis is conducted. I was kind of curious, since we have some time, if you could kind of go a little bit more into that and describe that to us.
Sure. So we focused that, and this is the post network analysis. Once we have our slate of projects for our constrained project list, we go back and do a system-wide assessment of environmental justice impacts, and it's GIS focused. So using readily available data for the most part. And there's some additional work that's done to develop the right tools to do the analysis. Miles, can I call on you again to kind of walk through the process that you developed?
Sure. You just want to go through the accessibility analysis or the whole?
I think the question was related to EJ in particular.
Okay. So in terms of how, I guess, in terms of the process, we have kind of two different steps of what we're doing for the EJ and the performance measures. So in the project scoring, EJ is incorporated through the accessibility measures directly. So what we have is there's an equity and accessibility goal. And under that, there's access to jobs and access to destinations. And those are included for both the total region and then for the designated EJ areas, which were developed as part of our socioeconomic analysis. And Sulab, please feel free to jump in on any of the details here. But essentially what we were looking at in that for the performance measures was total number of jobs accessible before and after the project for every person in those environmental justice tracks. They're identified at the census tract level and then broken down to TAZs. And then same thing for destinations, which were essentially goods and services. So it's a whole series of modeling basically that looks at it to determine essentially what the change in accessibility on average across the region would be for the total population and then for environmental justice area populations. And then that was also specific to, I think we did 4 different modes. So there was looking at transit, there was looking at auto, biking, and pedestrian access. So it's a pretty well-rounded accessibility analysis. And the goal there was to incorporate the equity directly into our performance-based planning. So I hope I hit on all the points you had there, Chet.
Yeah, I was hoping, could you talk a little bit about the GIS side, the analysis you did with the after the fact?
Sure. So then what we did at the end as the wrap up to all of it, essentially what we did was look at accessibility for the entire set of improvements that are included in Connect RVA 2045. So basically we did model-based measurements for TAZ to TAZ connections for auto and transit. And then we did the same thing using GIS's network analyst tool for bike and pedestrian networks, which included all the sidewalks, the shared use paths in the region, any sort of designated bike lanes, or the low stress bike networks. That is what I believe Phil was talking about earlier in the bike planning section. So we ran through that and basically we're able to look at all 4 modes again for overall from the entire set of investments, what would be the improvements in accessibility and get actual quantifiable benefits for the slate of investments.
Yeah, thanks, Miles. Sulab, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think Miles pretty much covered everything, unless we want further detail on how it's done. It tends to go more technical if you want to go more detailed than this.
We could, I mean, yeah, Richard, if there's time, we could talk more about the evaluation process. That's something we just wrapped up in the last couple of days, is the kind of the impacts and being able to understand how it impacts the overall region, how it impacts just EJ communities, the different types of impacts from each mode as well.
Okay. We don't have to go into detail today. I don't want to steal any more time. Next section, but I figure as we move along with the reporting, I can have this conversation with Richmond MPO more
Sure.
later on. With that said, I'll go ahead and hand this off to Ryan. He'll be covering the financial planning, financial constraint, and annual listing projects.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so I just had a few questions regarding the financial planning and fiscal constraint. Very important, obviously, being able to explain to the public how their dollars are spent, and realistically, based on realistic amounts of revenue. So it's a very important document. My first question regarding the fiscal constraint is how talk a little bit about how the anticipated revenue forecasts and project costs are developed for the long range plan in the TIP. I think we might touch on this a little bit already, but if you could briefly touch on that.
Sure. Yes, we talked a little bit about that this morning when we one of the findings from 2017 asked about getting the 20-year projections from DRPT, and we were able to get near-term projections and then escalate those out consistent with other federal revenues from VDOT as well as historic growth rate. So that's kind of where we how we were able to push out the DRP projections. VDOT has provided us, typically provides us with the full projections out to the horizon year of the plan. And then this year we also factored in, as we've discussed a couple of times today, expected local and regional projections from the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, and how we can expect that to impact the ability to fund implementation in the future. And Miles, jump in if you want, if I've misstated anything. But that's kind of the basic understanding of how we do the projections.
So I guess this is Miles, and I would add on. So for VDOT, it is relatively centralized. So the projections are done at the state level and then provided down to the MPOs based on projected obligation authority for the TIP, or projected revenues in the case of the LRTP. For transit, it's more bottom up. So it's basically GRTC provides the estimates to us in terms of the revenues and their obligation authority, which are then validated by DRPT. So it's a different approach that we take on the transit side, but ultimately it gets the same results. We're involving both the state and the transit agencies there. And then for 5310 funding, that comes directly down from the state. So those projects are selected through DRPT, and then DRPT provides us with the allocation information and the obligations that go with those.
Yeah, so Ryan, I just put on the screen the range plan, and it kind of lays out a little bit about what Miles was talking about, as well as how the investments are projected from near, mid, and long term across different types of investments.
Yeah, Chet. Can I see the breakdown by mode, if you don't mind? If you don't mind.
Let's see, let me find that. Bear with me.
No, take your time, Chet. I appreciate it. Thank you. Hey, Chet, I can also take a look at it after the review. No problem. I'm not rushing you. I'm just
Okay.
I can take a look at that after the review. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's probably the best
Yeah.
choice of action.
Hey, thanks, Chet.
Sure.
Now, I know that obviously COVID has had some impacts in terms of tax revenues. Ridership for transit was down significantly. Fare box revenue is down significantly. How is that playing into these revenue forecasts? I mean, it must be a little bit more difficult now than in the past to kind of anticipate 20 years horizon, in this uncertain kind of period right now. How are you kind of navigating that for this like long range plan forecast?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak briefly to it and then invite others to join in from local and statewide perspectives. But I think we've got more of an incentive than ever before to work closely with our partners and make sure we have an understanding of where the trends are moving and what we can expect in the future. Maybe in the future, in the next 2 weeks, in terms of what the impacts might be for funding sources. But I will say that Central Virginia, as we've started moving through this process with the CBTA in place, it does provide a level of comfort that there is an additional revenue source to help supplement our traditional sources. We understand that those are still our bread and butter source of funds, but having the ability to leverage some additional local and regional dollars to make ends meet and provide some cover for shortcomings is a great support for the processes that we're moving through. I think that well, I'll stop there in case others want to chime in.
So since this is really a question about how DRPT provided the revenue forecast, I feel like I might need to be able to enlighten a little bit. So our approach, because of how it is very hard to kind of anticipate those future years outside of the 6 years that are accounted for in the 6-year improvement program, our finance division had taken a general approach of going with 6 years of data and then projecting based off the average that we have seen with, in this case, GRTC receiving over the last 3 years in terms of capital. To answer your question about operating, because that's not reflected in these revenue forecasts for the LRTP, in general, in 2018, the General Assembly for Virginia approved legislation for us to kind of change our methodology for operating assistance as well as some of our capital assistance programs. We call it merit in this case, and I'd be glad to share that information on our website. But in particular, we decided to use a lot of performance data from our transit agencies to kind of anticipate on a year-to-year basis how the operating assistance would be. So because of that being based off the ridership numbers, it was hard for us to be able to account for that if you were trying to do that in a long-range planning exercise. In terms of COVID impacts, you are right that there are significant impacts across the state for all of our 47 transit agencies or so. And so, in general, what we're doing for this year is that we are still collecting FY21 numbers for the ridership, but we are not going to count that in our operating formula, which is roughly looking at a 3-year historical trend for the performance data.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a tough, tough problem across. I've seen other states too. They've either revenues flat, or then having to kind of do a micro adjustment or something, But it's been a very difficult process. I was just curious.
Yeah, I will also say, and I don't like speaking for GRTC because they're here, but they did also go fare free this year. So that is another element to consider in terms of their revenues and fare box recovery.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good point. I guess I wasn't talking about operating costs specifically, but that's actually a good question. I'm looking at the TIP fiscal constraint tables, and I'm guessing it probably has both in there. Maybe could someone, I guess just to refresh my memory on the difference between a projected obligation and a planned obligation. That's I believe a state terminology. Is that just basically when money is committed and available?
So this is Miles. From VDOT, we get the data with projected and planned. So the projected is the expected obligation authority that we would have for that fiscal year, and planned is the planned obligations that are actually in the TIP projects. And for the transit side, as I mentioned, it's a bottom-up approach, so it's actually a little different how we look at it. We don't have the same information. What we have is a total for the planned obligations that are in there.
Okay, it's planned obligations. Okay. So when is it? Is that when it's planned obligation? Is that when the federal funds are like apportioned? Is that when it's committed enough to be? Is that the same? I'm trying to, I always get tripped up on Virginia's term. They have other states too, and they do this a little differently. I'm just trying to understand when you say planned obligation, you mean a funding source that has been appropriated, apportioned? How would the federal
Be allocated?
Allocated. Yeah, this is Liz from Richmond
Allocated?
District Planning.
Okay.
We would say, first it's allocated, and then there's obligation authority. And then, so these planned obligations would fall underneath that, meaning that we're planning to spend the federal dollars under the year that it's in the TIP.
Okay. Okay. So planning to spend. Okay. Just gonna, so it's a little tricky. I mean, if so someone reading this document from the public, how would I know? I think most people understand revenue, most people understand project costs, but they see all these project obligation authority versus plan obligation. It kind of makes me a little trouble because I don't know if the general public, obviously I have questions myself, on what all this means. I know that this is maybe just something that's kind of utilized in the state, so it has to be utilized here in the TIP. But I don't know, has there been an attempt to try to make this more readable in some way? Like I just feel like if picking up the TIP document, I really don't feel like I understand what all this means. Like if I was just someone from the public, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
I just.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, I'm in the same boat you are. I mean, I think at the TPO level, we're trying to take a wholesale approach to making everything we do more readable and connect better with people. And I guess at this point, I'd be happy to say that we would love to work with our state partners to make all of this this process more user friendly, and if there's interest in looking at this comprehensively, we'd be happy to be a part of that.
No, yeah, I get it. I mean, what I'm really trying to drive here is that, from this information, from this revenue and projected costs, you're able to maybe paint a picture again about, the amount of funds or percentage of funds, like say in the tip, that are going towards, maintenance operations of the system versus, capacity expansions. Just, that's really what I'm driving at. I think it was mentioned in the tip a little bit about that. It's always, just another level analysis. I think that, really helps the public understand kind of, either a percentage of or dollar. Usually percentage probably means more meaningful, but just the overall, what is all their tax revenue going toward? Is it going to just main? And people, I think, are really quite surprised. They're like, wow, I didn't realize, this system is pretty vast. It requires a lot of maintenance, a lot of, operations costs, are high. Why can't we just keep building all these, new projects? Well, it's, this is why, you really, so kind of, it's really to kind of help demonstrate the needs and so forth to the, to the public. So that's what I was driving at. I mean, it's nothing wrong with it, with the way you have it. It's just more of are you able to take the information and then, make further analysis from it? And if you are, then that's fine. That's really all this.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity to look at some additional visualizations and some of the other tools that we've started to incorporate in our other products to help tell this story better. Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay. I think that was my last question, Richard. How does a financial plan demonstrate revenue is reasonably expected to be available to operate and maintain the system? It's a lot of words, but I think that's what I was getting at. Having the constrained financial plan demonstrate that you're able to, to me, like, what is fiscal constraint? I mean, you can have, we have this much amount of revenue, X, and then we have, Y number of projects we want to build. Okay, you can match those up pretty easy. Right? I'm sure you always could find enough projects to match the revenue, but it's also like you're also constrained by certain limiting factors in your transportation system. You have to operate and maintain what you have, and then from that point you can move on to, other bigger projects, capital expansion, and so forth. So that's what, just trying to that next level, showing, we have this amount of need first, almost not a priority, but it's an important, part of what we need to do here, and then, moving on from there. So that's all I had. I think that's all I had. Richard, so.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. And
thank you very much. So thank you.
Okay, perfect. Does anyone else on the federal team have any follow-up questions or discussion points? Okay. So it looks like we're running ahead of schedule here. We're scheduled to take a break at 2:45. Right now it's 2:30. I don't really have any discussion points or questions in regards to this section. So if everybody's open to it, we can take a half-hour break and reconvene at 3 o'clock for the final section, which will cover public involvement process, Title VI, DBE, EJ, and ADA.